sun's gone in.
Clear prop. Okay, well, I've just done my walk round. The sun should come out a bit more, hopefully. I'm hoping it will. I took the chance that it might. All the bits and pieces done, T's and P's are fine. Full and free. And I've got my flap set. There's my 4,000. $5,000. I need 6.3 really, and then I roll on with it. T's and P's are good, she's warmed up enough. There's a 6.3, let's go then. There's 500 feet quite quickly. And reduce the throttle. $900 feet. There's 1,000 feet. Let's drop the RPM down. Get to my eco cruise. T's and P's are all good. I'm Alan of Salisbury, aka the Airborne Troubadour, for obvious reasons. And I made the video The Occult Art of Law, which went viral a few years ago. I'm just going to have this brief little chat about law, and when I talk about law I'm talking about Lima Oscar Romeo Echo, L-O-R-E, and not the reduced inferior version L-A-W, which is land, air and water. Law basically is divine, universal, natural, and the law common to all life. Reducing that down to land, air and water is to separate jurisdictions for control, basically. The idea of law is that L-O-R-E is sovereign, is that everyone is a sovereign under law. If we look at this word democracy, demos means people, cracy means rule, so we have the people rule, and those that are ruling are sovereign. So democracy means the people are sovereign. Any monarch, or traditionally before we had the Roman cults backed William the Bastard, William the so-called Conqueror, which was another invasion backed by the Roman cult. But when I say the Roman cult, I'm talking about a very old cult, the Monoite cult, the Babylonian cult, which basically took over Rome, or the Roman Empire, and then sought to take over the whole world. It's like the Roman Empire is really or was really the New World Order Mark I. And they needed two vehicles to do that. One which is law, and what Justinian came up with. It was the emperor, I believe, in around 530 AD, was Corpus Juris. And then we have, of course, the Roman Church with their version of divine rule. So before all that got underway, we had law, where there was basically no third-party interloper between a sovereign and his creator. So that really needs to sink in a little bit, as it's quite pertinent, really. No third-party interloper between a sovereign man or sovereign woman and their creator. And if we look at the Magna Carta, was probably the most famous time, or maybe the only time, law was actually written down, because law, true law, is based on the natural constitution, that natural constitution being empathy. So if we look at true law, for example, all trials, this is an article that was in the Great Charter, Magna Carta 1215, all trials must be cost-free. Well, obviously, because as soon as you introduce a profit motive in law, then that's going to corrupt justice. And so that's why all trials should be cost-free. Also, all trials are jury trials. There are no judges. And Magna Carta was also in perpetuity. The reason it was in perpetuity is mainly because that which is true can never change. If it can change, then it wasn't true in the first place. So that which is true is in perpetuity. And that statement or that article that says all trials must be cost-free is true, because if you introduce a profit motive in justice, it's likely to corrupt that process. That's true. Also, another article is that all trials must be jury trials, and jury trials of peers. So in other words, what you have is a fully floating justice system. So no matter how or what your social standing is, you will be tried by your peers. So it's fully floating. So no matter how rich you are or how poor you are, those are the guys that are gonna try you. Also, a jury trial, the members of the jury, they must have empathy. Empathy is essential, because in a jury trial, each member of the jury has to put themselves into the situation or position of those being tried and ask themselves, what would I have done in that situation? And so if you have no empathy, then you can't really be a member of a jury, because law, L-O-R-E, is heart-centered and it's empathic. So in another article in the Great Charter is basically that the jury decide what the sentence is. And when I say sentence, that's not necessarily punitive. Now, the first thing a jury is going to really need to do is to decide if there is any evidence of malicious intent. Because where there is malicious intent, it's likely there's also guilt. Basically, law in terms of the British, these British Isles, and what was around before William the Conqueror, and also Austin and his invasion in around about 570, after the Great Comet of 562, which destroyed most of the British Isles. That left the back door open really for an easy invasion of the Angles and the Saxons. But the British, the term British, unreliably informed, is Old Hebrew, which means basically men of the covenant, or people of the covenant. The covenant being Mosaic law, the law of Moses. And then it was updated of the arrival of Christianity into the British Isles around AD 37 by Joseph of Arimathea and 12 disciples. The 12 disciples were given 12 hides of land by a king Gwereth. Gwereth basically translates into the Anglo-Saxon, or what became the English, as George. And he became a Christian, and in return for that he gave the disciples one hide of land each. And those hides of land are mentioned in the Doomsday Book as having never paid any tax, and that's about 1,000 years later. That's the Doomsday's books. Now the Doomsday's books, when William the Conqueror came over, he came over with a form of law, Corpus Juris, which allowed liens to be imposed on the property of debtors. So in Corpus Juris, almost magically everybody became indebted to the king, and therefore liens were put on their property. And that's what the Doomsday Book is. You've probably heard of the term unalienable rights. That means nobody has the right to put a lien on your property. And that's what we lost when William the Conqueror arrived, and the Roman Church and Corpus Juris. But before that we had law, and we had our unalienable rights as well. These are in perpetuity. A question that a lot of people don't really ask, which I think is quite pertinent really, is who wrote the Great Charter, Magna Carta? Because clearly it wasn't King John, and it wasn't the clergy, and it wasn't the barons. So it was already known. And my take on it is that the Knight of all Knights, William Marshal, who defeated the French in 1216, because you have to remember in 1215 the French had invaded again, and the barons had sided with the French. Well, some of them had, and also so had the City of London. When we think in terms of the City of London, we should think in terms of Gog and Magog, or if you're of the Muslim persuasion, that's your face, Yaju and Maju. They are the descendants that came down from the Caucasus, which of course is where the Khazaria was, and those descendants. So there's quite a lot of information there, but basically all trials must be jury trials and trials of the peers. Another article says that if the law is unjust, in other words, if the jury sit down and they say, well, blimey, I would have done exactly what the sovereign that we're trying would have done, therefore we need to look at the law and judge the law. And a jury can annul any act, statute, any concoction created by Corpus Juris, which is Roman law. Corpus Juris means body of law, L-A-W, which means land, air and water, so the law on the land. The law of the air is canon law, or the law of the Roman Church. And then we've got water, which is maritime law. some would say rather loosely, the law of piracy, core piracies. The Roman cult basically are a death cult, and in their system of corpus juris, you're not deemed to be living. You are a corpse, and because the dead have no rights other than the rights that are granted to them. So you become basically the dead talking, or a corpse orating. Wherever you see the bundle of rods tied together with an axe in it, that is known as a fascia, which is where we get the term fascist from, and also the axe is where we get the term axis or axis powers from. It's all Roman, and it has nothing to do with Lima Oscar Romeo Echo law, the law of sovereigns. The British were the descendants of the 10 so-called lost tribes. They knew exactly where they were. They were termed as being the lost tribes because they were lost to their religious leaders who had decided to go on the Babylonian route of law. They thought that was all a good idea, and when they put it to the 10 tribes said, no, we're not having that. And so they were lost to their religious leaders, or most of them were lost, and they basically emigrated to the land of milk and honey, which is Brittany, or these British Isles. They were the people of the covenant. Before that, there was another emigration of a woman called Albine, and this is where we get the term Albion from, and this is what the land is known as, is Albion. So those who consider themselves to be indigenous sovereigns, which is the highest standing you can have really in law, because this is the land granted to you, this is the land where you were born, the land of Albion, then you are an indigenous sovereign. And even under corpus juris and the Roman laws of the so-called United Nations, it's a questionable term, united, whenever I see that, it's a corporate term about an amalgamation of corporations under maritime law. But basically, in terms of Albion, or in terms of being an indigenous sovereign, the United Nations are bound to uphold your rights and your laws and your customs and traditions. And so is our monarch, King Charles, in the oath. Customs and traditions are as high, if not higher, than law, as in LAW. So that's rather a lot to take on board, but at the moment we're in a situation where we have no law, as in L-O-R-E, because of we've been fraudulently and by way of deception deceived out of our rights and our estates. Our estates, obviously, including these mortal bodies, which were granted to our souls. If we look at this term identity or ID, id or id is Old Hebrew, and it means possession. And what is deemed to be in legal land or law as being your identity is not you. Your identity is not you as a sovereign. This is really important. In Rome, slaves would have a tag around their neck which was called a namos, and that namos told anybody who was interested who you were the property of. In other words, who your master was or who owned you. And that was the Namos, which is where we get the term name from, which was kind of upgraded again around about Tudor England by our man Frank Bacon, the editor of the King James Bible, who introduced the word church instead of ecclesia. Ecclesia means gathering or assembly. Church comes from Kirk. Kirkos is goddess of the underworld, just as much as Vatica is the goddess of the underworld, which is where it get the term Vatican from, the goddess of the underworld. So in a way they're kind of telling you, they're giving you notice, you know, and your silence is consent, or your lack of not rebutting that assumption is consent in their system. I know it's all confusing, but anyway, your identity is not you. So if we look at Tudor England, and Tudor comes from a North Welsh family, which is what Henry VII was, which was claiming his lineage along the Welsh line. Shouldn't actually really use the term Welsh, because the Welsh are really the British. The term Welsh is an Anglo-Saxon word. It's a derogatory term. Welsh actually means stranger. So when they left and to go to America, some of them came back, the Anglo-Saxons invaded, and they called them strangers. So they were, which is a derogatory term, you're a stranger in your own land. That's where the term Welsh comes from Walisha, which is Germanic. I digress. So in Tudor England, the term yes or no was not commonly used. People would say yay or nay. So the term name is derived from name-e, what you're not. What's your name-e? In other words, who are you not? And that ties in with your identity, because you're not really your ID. So who are you not? This is why this whole concept of having a digital ID or having an identity is fraudulent, because you're claiming to be something that you're not. And also in terms of the currency that we're using, no, I didn't say money, because money is weighted metal. You can measure the length, breadth, width of a coin or a lump of metal. Therefore, it's a fact in three-dimensional reality, and anything that's a fact in three-dimensional reality also exists in four-dimensional reality, which is linear time. So money is a fact. Can you measure the length, breadth, width and weight of a promise? No. So it's not a fact, therefore it cannot be money. The Roman death cult and its associates, they gave up trying to create gold or transform other lesser metals into gold. And they came up with currency instead, because people treat currency as if it's gold. You can actually buy gold with it, can't you? But it's not money. These terms, it's important to know what they mean. So anyway, you're not your ID, you can't be your ID, you can't be your name, it's not who you are. So if you go to a legal court, a court of legal, and that term legal in 1893 was defined by the Encyclopedia Britannica as meaning the undoing of God's law. Okay, so it's the undoing of law, it's the undoing of divine law, of L-O-R-E. So you have to ask yourself, who's interested in the undoing of God's law, or divine law, or universal law, or natural law, or the law common to all life, and that they're subjecting us, which is why we're subjects, to this inferior jurisdiction of legal. What I'm trying to do here is, it's called the apocalypse, which is to remove the veil. It's to shine the light on deceptions, or also to remove the veil of deceptions. And that's what this 2025 is all about, is to do that, so that people, if they exercise their free will and choice, it's up to them what they do. If they choose to reclaim their sovereignty, which means taking responsibility as an individual, we are then a sovereign people, as in the people are sovereign, as in the people rule, as in true democracy. So those that want true democracy need to step up and become sovereigns, and really get to grips with what true law, as in LORE, is. That's the benchmark, that's the standard. And basically my take on it is that William Marshall said to King John, what are you going to do if I defeat the French, if I defeat Philip? And King John said, well, those that have been committed treason against me, I'll have their heads. To which William Marshall could have replied, well, they can just as well do you for treason, because in a democracy, which was what was here before, those people, those barons, can put you on trial for your treason against the sovereign people, because all you are as a monarch is the first amongst equal. You're lumbered with a huge service commitment, and that service commitment is basically to be the first among equals. You're like the chief in a tribe. You know, this whole sovereign thing is indigenous, and it is tribal, and it is the natural constitution of sovereign men and women, that being of empathy, one of empathy, of being heart-centered. If what I'm saying kind of resonates in your heart, which I hope it does, then that's a living constitution. It's not a bunch of dead ink on paper. It's actually a living, breathing constitution. And that is the law. I think that's what William Marshall basically said. If here's what the law is, and I think he was a Knights Templar, and I think he was able to get a copy of, or find a copy of, what was written in the Magna Carta, those articles that I've mentioned. And notice that I've not mentioned Article 61. This is because my take on lawful rebellion, the lawful rebellion is done by those who rebel against true law. The whole legal system is a rebellion against law. What William the Conqueror was doing, what the Roman cults were doing, is a rebellion against natural law. Natural law being divine, universal, natural, and the law common to all life. And that is the benchmark, and that is the law. Constables are there to uphold the law. And sadly, too many times today we find that they are breaking the law in order to enforce a legal, which is inferior, which, according to Magna Carta, is treason. Right, I think I'm going to enjoy my flight a bit now. The sun's about to go down. I've probably got a few more minutes. It's 10 minutes really. I can see the runway over there. And I'd like to thank David Cook for designing this delightful aeroplane. Thank you, David. Got the runway on the nose there. Euro traffic, Romeo Tango on long final. Just knock the power down a bit more on that. Give her a little bit more grunt. I'm still under £4,000. Just put those flaps down and give it a bit of grunt. It just stabilizes everything up. How blessed am I? Gosh, this grass needs cutting. I can actually watch the sun go down. I think that's what I'll do. It's gorgeous.